Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about my favorite fiction books. I've been making booktube videos for a very long time now, and I have received countless requests to make this kind of a video, but I have admittedly put it off over the years because I have this deep fear that the very next month after I make the video, I will read a new favorite and it won't be on my favorites list. But I think I just need to accept that that's the risk you take. I need to stop putting it off. So I decided to take the plunge, make the video, and talk to you about some of my favorite works of fiction. I should note right at the beginning of the video that I've decided to not include classics as a part of this list. I love far too many classic books. I think they would come to dominate this list. And also, I wouldn't know how to rank them against the other works of fiction that I love that are historical fiction or contemporary. So I've decided that they're worthy of their own video, and I will make that video at a later date. So this is the list of my favorite fiction books as it stands right now. There are 7 books on this list. Of course, I would have preferred if it would have been around 8, or even more ideally 10, but I didn't want to include books just to include them because I've loved a lot of fiction books over the years, but there are only the select few that really count as favorites to me, ones that I connected with at the time that continue to mean a lot to me over the years. I didn't want to make it a list of 10 books just to be a list of 10 books. I wanted to bring you the truest sense of my favorites. I have ranked them. I will be starting with number 7 and working my way up to my number 1 favorite. I'll briefly tell you what they're about, and I'll tell you what I love about them. At number 7 is Margaret the First by Danielle Dutton. This is a beautiful little novel on the inside and out. It's historical fiction that stars real-life historical figure Margaret Cavendish, who was an English writer and thinker who was way before her time. She's considered to be one of the first female science fiction writers. She was the first woman to attend a meeting of the Royal Society of London. She published under her own name, which women at the time didn't really do. For the times that she lived in, she was an eccentric. This is Dutton's take on her life, and it is done so skillfully that I can say I've not really read anything else like this, except maybe an Edith Wharton novel. I was so connected with Margaret's character that I could perceive her reactions to people and situations before Dutton had actually described them within the text. I knew her character that well at that point. And this is not a long book. Not only do I think the author did just a brilliant job with this book, but I also felt a very personal connection to a lot of the sentiments found in this book. I'm not an impulsive person in the slightest, but I felt so connected to something I read in this book that I ran out and got a tattoo of it on my shoulder pretty much immediately after I finished this book. I did a whole video about that tattoo and what all it means to me, so I won't go into detail about it here, but this book meant a lot to me in that moment, and I've continued to feel that connection. I literally carry a piece of this book with me wherever I go, and I've never regretted it, not for 1 minute. At number 6 is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is a fantasy novel that's a loose retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's set in a small, quiet village that is protected from an evil, encroaching forest by a wizard who lives nearby. They call him the Dragon, even though he's not actually a dragon. But in exchange for his service every so many years, he claims a 16-year-old girl from the village. Every girl he chooses is special in some kind of a way. She's particularly beautiful or especially talented, and so on and so forth. She has to have a special something that sets her apart. And because of that fact, everyone in the village is convinced that it's going to be the flawless Kasia who is selected. Even Kasia is convinced of this. She has resigned herself to it. But much to everyone's surprise, it's actually her best friend, the inelegant Agnieszka, who's selected. The reason why she's chosen very quickly becomes clear, and throughout the rest of the book she refines what makes her special and also tries to help the wizard protect the realm even when he doesn't want her help. And she's also on a mission to find out what it was that originally corrupted this forest. This is a prime example of how the books that I love don't necessarily need to be perfect. I don't need to think they're perfect in order to love them, because this book has major pacing problems. I recognize that, but it has never taken away from how much I love it. Agnieszka is such a fun yet frustrating character, and her relationship with her best friend Kasia is one of the best and most realistic female friendships I've ever seen in a book. From the very first page, I adored this book, and I still feel the same way about it years later. Right after I read it, I know I did a review of it here on my channel. I think it was one of the first reviews I did here on my BookTube channel, if not the first review. I've not seen that video in a very long time, but I'm assuming that you'll be able to feel the joy radiating off of me as I talk about this book, because that's how much I loved it then, and that's still how much I love it now. Number 5 on this list of favorites is actually one from this year. It's The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. This book essentially tells the entire life story of a botanist. We meet her right as she's born at the turn of the 19th century, so obviously we get to know her parents as well. The family lives in Philadelphia, and her father runs a very successful botanical business. Since we are with this main character, Alma, from the time that she's born, we do get to see her as a child, we get to see her come into womanhood, but actually the majority of the time that we spend with this character, she's either middle-aged or older. She has a brilliant mind, she's an amazing scientist, but she's a late bloomer in several different regards. She's slow to create a connection with her adopted sister. She finds love much later in life. But since we're with this character for her whole life, we get to know all the different sides of her. We get to know the nice sides, and we get to know the not so nice sides. We get to see her make really big mistakes that she later regrets and tries to make up for. I think this book is so incredibly gorgeous. It's really all about evolution, all of the adaptations we see in the natural worlds, and how those can be mirrored in the learning process of a deeply flawed but highly resilient main character. I actually did a full review of this one. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts, I will link it for you in the description box below and up in the cards. Moving up the list at number 4 is The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. This is actually a similar kind of story to The Signature of All Things in terms of its scope, because in this book we follow a small cast of characters from when they meet at a performing arts camp in the 1970s, then through the years as their lives change and as they try to hold on to these friendships that mean so much to them. Meg Wolitzer has become an author who I really love. I found that she has a knack for writing group dynamics, and that is on full display here. But even though we do follow this group of characters throughout the book, we do have one central character, Jules, who is kind of the outsider who's brought into this group. Fitting in and finding her place are things that she struggles with, not just at camp, but also throughout her life. It's kind of a recurring theme for her. But all of the individuals within this group have their own individual problems, and we do get to hear about them and how they deal with them. I fell in love with this book, not just because I seem to love the formula of following characters their entire life long and learning about life alongside of them, but also because I have a very similar friend group from college. We all got really close during school, and even though all of our lives have pretty drastically changed from when we graduated, we still have that bond. I recognized and still do recognize a lot of that experience in what these characters go through. It was really special to me when I read it because we had all just recently graduated and we were trying to figure out what we were all going to do with our lives, but it's still special to me now as we continue to forge our own paths. Entering the top 3, the next book on the list is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a hugely atmospheric fantasy novel all about a traveling circus that arrives without warning and is only open at night. Inside the circus, you will find that it has nearly unlimited culinary and sensory delights, but you will also find that it hosts a magical competition held by proxy. This is an enormously popular book that I actually read before I joined BookTube, and while I know it is not a universally beloved book, I give this book so much credit for getting me 100% back into reading after I had fallen out of the habit of reading for pleasure for several years while I was in school. I love being transported entirely into a different world when I'm reading a book, but that can be a challenge for me since I am so deeply rooted in reality. but this one completely swept me away. My birthday party last year actually had a Night Circus theme. I had a tent cake, I made chocolate mice, it was a whole thing, and I had an amazing night. I will actually be due for a reread of this book here soon. The last time I reread it, I made a discussion video about the experience, which I will link for you in the cards and in the description box below if you'd like to see it. Now on to the best of the best. My second favorite fiction book of all time is The Tsar of Love and Techno by Anthony Marra. This is technically a short story collection, but all of the stories are interconnected, so it's more like a novel told in short stories. It all starts in the 1930s with a Soviet censor whose job it is to edit disgraced people out of official imagery, meaning photographs or paintings where they once existed. It's his job to remove them, which was a real thing that happened many years before Photoshop. One day, he's given the task to edit out a prima ballerina in this way. She's been disgraced, so they want to remove her from history. And in an act of defiance, he decides to erase most of her, but leaves one part of her behind. He leaves one of her hands dangling in the picture. He also does some other things that we learn about to kind of stick it to the man, particularly after a traumatic event in his life. But these choices that this one man makes start off this chain of events that we learn about in these stories. Every story that you read is connected back in at least one way to another story that you already read and potentially to stories that are upcoming. This book is so well thought out. I loved how everything linked together like the most perfect jigsaw puzzle. I obviously loved the Russian element, considering I am a Russian history and culture fanatic, but I also loved the roller coaster of emotions this book took me on. At times I would be laughing, at other times it would just knock the wind out of me. I remember being really excited finding out that this book was going to come out. I had a hold on it at the library because I had read his previous book, A Constellation of Vital Phenomena, and really enjoyed it, but I was not at all prepared for how deeply I was going to fall in love with this book. This is another one that I reviewed in the very early days of my channel, so if you would like to see me looking younger, talking about this book and geeking out about Russia all at the same time, I will link that video for you in the cards and in the description box below. And finally, anyone who knows my channel well, you'll already know what's coming. My favorite fiction book of all time is Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. I try not to speak about this book too frequently here on my channel since I don't want to be annoying about it, but it's admittedly difficult because of how much I love this book and because I reread it every single year. This was another one that I read in my days before BookTube, and although I really loved it the first time I read it, it wasn't until after my first reread of it that I truly understood the magic of this book. The plot of this one is fairly tame. 3 people, 2 friends, and 1 stranger meet by coincidence at a bar on New Year's Eve 1937, and then throughout the rest of the book we follow these 3, one more than the other 2, throughout the calendar year of 1938. This whole book is essentially a statement that 1 year in your life has the ability to change, to shape everything that comes after it. It's a keystone year in your life. And 1938 is that year for our main character, Katie Content. This book has her voice as an older woman. She's looking back at this year in her life. She's telling you the story of what happened, but with the wisdom of her older years and with the knowledge of just how important this year was in her life. And since that's the case, there is indeed a ton of wisdom scattered throughout this book. There are lines in this book that, no joke, I think about every single day. There is actually a small tattoo I want to get that reminds me of one of those lines. If I end up getting it, I will make a video about it. The writing is gorgeous. The characters are electric. It takes place in the 1930s. The main character is of Russian descent. There is not one thing that I don't adore about this book. I can no longer count on one hand the number of times that I have read it, and I'm looking forward to the day where I can say that I can no longer count on 2 hands the number of times I have read and reread this book. I am connected to this book with every fiber of my being, and there is not a single book out there that even comes close to how much I love this. So as things stand right now, those are my 7 all-time favorite fiction books. I certainly hope I will be adding to this list as the years go on. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.